Welcome, 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 everyone, to the Improvly Speaking podcast. I am so excited that you're joining today. I'm your host, Dana Gowan, and we're back for another super fun guest episode. I can't wait to introduce you to this guest who is combining beer and improv and community and team building. So fun. But before we get into that, let me give you a rundown of this podcast, what we're all about here. If you're new, joining for the first time, so excited that you've decided to check it out. And if you're returning, you know the spiel, but here it goes. The goals of this podcast are 1, to help everyone understand the benefits of improvisation and applied improvisation. 2, to demonstrate how improv shows up in all aspects of our lives. Today, we'll be focusing on business owning and taking risks and how improv can help with that. And 3, to just inspire you to try new things, get out of your head and judgment zones, and find new passions and outlets that can just give more fulfillment and purpose and excitement and entertainment to your life. And our guest today is an improviser, applied improv facilitator, and now business owner who is bringing improv back to Ann Arbor, Michigan area. Let me introduce you to our special guest, Tony DeRosa. Tony worked at Google and YouTube for over a decade, but he has recently, in 2023, moved back to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to open up Hear.say Brewing Company and Theater, where he is the owner and co-founder. Hear.say Brewing is Ann Arbor's newest improv theater and brewery, set to open to the public around June 2024, which we're recording this in late May 2024. So I'm excited to talk about the grand opening. And by the time this episode comes out, Hear.say will be brewing and up and running, so that will be really exciting. While they haven't opened the brewery piece yet to the public, they have already started offering improv classes and such. The whole facility has a brewery and tap room, a beer garden, which is coming soon, and an open space for improv classes, shows, team building events, and so much more. And kind of unique, which we'll get into, they also have an Airbnb on site where guests can stay. They can host improv instructors, brewers, anyone coming to teach a class or just wants to stay and enjoy the property. So that is really cool. We'll talk about that more. Tony has an MBA from University of Michigan with a focus on entrepreneurship. Please welcome the incredibly talented, tenacious, and thoughtful Tony DeRosa. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you so much, Dan. That's such a great intro. Thanks for having me on your podcast. It's exciting to be here and reconnecting after a couple of years.
I know. I was just thinking about that too. So we met, just to tell the story, we met in, I think it was September 2021 at Camp Improv Yosemite, right?
That's right. Yeah. So we were both there. That was my first camp experience. I don't know if was that also your first experience?
It was my first camp. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to set the stage, obviously you're right. I don't know if you're technically in Yosemite, but if you're not in it, you're like right on the outskirts of it, and you're like amidst the trees, and you're getting used to, okay, I'm an adult living in a bunk for a few days with people, and you're like nerding out on all the improv you can possibly handle over a long weekend. But I know for me, that was a really foundational experience, because you make such interesting connections. People are so welcoming and inviting. And it's amazing that, the grand total of time people have maybe spent together, with some people it might be in like the single digits. And it's like some of these amazing friendships and connections that form out of these very short, in the grand scheme of things, weekends.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I love the way you phrased that. And we did not have the same session. Like Yosemite is split into kind of groups of classes where you hang out with those same people in that class the whole weekend. It's a little unique compared to their other camps. And so I know we weren't in the same group, but I remember we chatted, I think, on the last day of camp. and then ended up connecting over social media afterwards. I think you had posted that you were doing team building workshops and such and leadership workshops using applied improv. And I was like, oh, let's chat. And so we connected after camp, just like a little Zoom call. And I remember this was back in, I think, 2021. Like, we kind of had all these dreams and goals for improv. Like, we're working in the corporate world, but, we want to do something else. We want to lead these workshops. And now, flash forward, which I know there's a lot in between, which we'll get to. But, Tony, you have fulfilled those goals that you had and more, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been quite a journey. I think I've known for a few years that something along the lines of what I'm now doing should be my next career step. But it's just kind of finding the courage and the right moment to just attack it and make it happen. I'm going to butcher this story, and also like the location of the thing I'm about to describe is like not this most inspiring place. And I'll just say it's like there's this parable I think I've seen online, but I've also seen in like the bathroom at Jimmy John's, and it's the sandwich shop. If people don't know Jimmy John's, but it's like it's this whole long parable that I'm going to work really hard so that I can do all this stuff and I'll save this money, and then someday when I like make all this money, I'll get a boat and go fishing every day. And like I think the takeaway is that the local person from the village is like, well, that's already what I'm doing now, right? And it's like the life that this like Mexican villager is living is like what this person is like working to save money for and do. And I think I just hit these moments of, okay, if I won the lottery tomorrow, doing this type of business is exactly what I would be working on. So it gets into a point of like, don't put that off. I mean, certainly do things in a hopefully a smart and so in a way where you think you'll have, what you're doing will have legs and you've got the right support and backing, but don't project things so far in the future that it's like there's all these prerequisites. If it's really what's going to make you happy or help you live a more fulfilling life, find a pathway to sort of do that. So anyway, probably did not think the bathroom at Jimmy John's would come up during this conversation.
I did not, but I love it. And you know what? Inspiration is everywhere if you're open to seeing it, right? I mean, you can walk right past it and just use the bathroom at Jimmy John's and never notice it, but you were open at that moment and it really left an impression on you.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. And I want to hear all about the past 3 years and the journey that you've had to get to this moment, because I know it's been it's been a fun but also probably challenging 3 years. But first, so you mentioned that Camp Yosemite was your first time at camp. It was mine too. How long were you doing improv before you went to camp? Tell me about your improv journey and how and why you got into improv.
Yeah. So my first experience with improv, I guess my very, very first was doing a meetup group. It wound up being a 1-day session for me. And that was when all the way back to 2010, 11, I was living in Connecticut. I went to a meetup and it was a 1-day thing. And I'll be honest, unfortunately, if like a jam or a meetup type session isn't well run, it can kind of turn people off a little bit to improv. And so it wasn't, everybody was very kind, but just, I felt kind of thrown into stuff I didn't have context for. And so I try to be mindful of that, by the way, if I'm running jams or stuff, like, do you make it feel safe for people to jump in and kind of understand the context or sort of what's going on. But so I had done that, and then I kind of put it on the back burner because I always thought improv is something I'd want to explore. And then I decided there was this new brewery and theater actually opening in Ann Arbor in late 2015. And it wound up being opened by a couple. The guy's name, who was primarily day to day, creative director for the theater and brewing, is Jason Tamalia. And so if we fast forward, he's actually now on board with Hear.say Brewing, and I'll sort of explain that whole, kind of what happened there. But so I started taking classes in 2016. So that's really where, for the most part, my improv journey begins. And I remember it was the year I was getting married. And so,
wow.
Wedding planning season, I was doing my MBA at night. So I was working full time for Google during the day. I was in the midst of an MBA program. I took off of my MBA, which had normally been night class. I was like, okay, I'm going to give myself sort of the gift of something that'll be fun, a way to de-stress, kind of do something totally different than I had been doing, taking business classes. So I decided to sign up for the level 1 improv class. And our class show wound up being, I think it was like Thursday of the week of my wedding. So I'm performing in
Oh
like the
my.
student showcase, and it's like all my in-laws in the front two rows. And we played a game. I'll always remember, this is a little off color. So Dana, if you have to cut this, you can cut it. So the first two rows is like all my family, and we're playing a game that's often called shift left or Foursquare, but it's a game where people rotate around and do different scenes and then revisit those scenes. And I was doing a scene. I think the very first moment I had on stage, it's all my in-laws, and I initiate a scene with, "Well, if it isn't the lady that took a dump on my lawn." And
Oh my
it was
gosh.
just like, it's ridiculous. Like, this is very, very surreal moment. I probably initiate scenes a little bit. There's nothing necessarily intrinsically wrong with that initiation, but it was just kind of a ridiculous scenario to set up in the very first show of all time.
It was your 101 class. Like,
It's the
yeah,
101. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We know.
Stuff.
We all know
Yeah.
here.
Stuff can go off, a little off the rails, a little bit more blue or a little bit more into that type of humor. But it's just one of those moments where I was like, all right. So that was when things kind of began. I then, followed through and went through the whole curriculum at Pointless. I had some other really foundational experiences. I did a one-act show that we wrote through improv and character work at a theater in Detroit called Planet Ant, and just kept kind of working at it. Got cast on a year-long house team that performed weekly and sort of got a lot of the experience of the branding and marketing and doing the tech booth when we weren't performing. And so it was this very foundational experience where we're getting weekly coaching. And I am a huge believer in coaching for the improvisers listening. If you have an indie team or you're just looking to really, up the ante, I think having an experienced coach can really help show you blind spots or create exercises. If you have a good coach, I think they'll customize things to really help the group take those next steps. So that was kind of what happened. And then our run ended right before the pandemic started. So that was sort of the timing. A new group had been cast. There was a lot of enthusiasm, and then boom, lockdown.
Womp, womp, womp.
So I won't spend too much time because I think everybody's been through reliving that era a lot. But the story behind Pointless is that, unfortunately, so a big part of the foundation of that business was that actually the owners, Jason and Tori. So Tori was Jason's partner, and she had unfortunately terminal cancer. And so she, from the founding of the business, like that was kind of an element, and she was getting a lot of experimental treatment and sort of going through all of that. And they were sort of running that and hoping for as long a runway as possible. But a couple things happened there. So the business, obviously closed due to COVID. And then in the next year, unfortunately, Tori did pass. And so Jason did take some time to kind of be there for his family and go through the grieving process. And so I had moved during that phase to California. My wife was going through a fellowship in pediatrics at Stanford. So we were in the Bay Area, did 3 years there. And then somewhere around, I want to say late 22, early 23, started to, seriously kind of look at, okay, where is Lauren going to go? Because she had done a 3-year program. And so it was like a 3-year fellowship. And we started looking at coming back to Michigan. We have a lot of family here, and we're just kind of thinking about that. And I started to look at things that, hey, if we're going to go back, this brick and mortar improv business that also was a brewery closed, and like it was a very popular business model. I think Jason did an amazing job of setting up something that people really cared about and had a lot of community behind it. So he and I got back in touch, and I kind of checked in to say, hey, it's been a few years. Just how are you doing? Where are things at? And, he had gotten to a point of wanting to jump back in and do something like this with me. So we started looking at a variety of options, both leasing space, buying space, as I was prepping for this move in mid 2023. But, we were working with a realtor and looked at some options, and we finally ended up getting under contract to purchase the building that we currently have, which was a now defunct brewery. So somewhat turnkey. We've definitely had to do stuff there, more like aesthetic and, so the painting, and there's an event space we're turning into our theater. But we got under contract in September and then closed on the space in February. So that is kind of like the highlights of sort of everything that happened between starting the improv journey in 2016, moving away for a few years, and then coming back.
Wow. While you were in the Bay Area, did you have a place that you mostly performed at? Were you at End Games or another place?
Yeah, good call. So I wound up not being as engaged in the San Francisco community out there. I was performing at a really wonderful theater called Made Up Theater that's in
Oh,
Fremont,
nice.
California. So it's
Yeah.
actually in the East Bay, kind of just if you go south from the peninsula, just sort of wrap around, you get to Fremont from San Jose, maybe another 15 minutes from there, depending on traffic. And so Fremont is a really cool, very multicultural, town in Silicon Valley, headquarters of Tesla. Very interesting, or used to be. I think they've kind of relocated, but it's a small
Yeah.
town, and this theater is just really amazing. There's a guy named Sean Taylor who leads that program. And very early into moving to California, there was suddenly an open audition after things were sort of starting to reopen at that point, which wasn't immediate. I'm kind of spacing a little bit on the time frame, but let's say like 2021 or so, give or take.
Mhm.
He put out an open audition. They'd had a lot of people move during COVID. And actually, the funny thing was, two of my really good friends from Ann Arbor that also had performed at the same theater wound up eventually getting cast on the same house team at Made Up Theater. So there wound up being
What?
three of us that had all trained at this tiny theater in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're now on the team. One of there's only one house team at Made Up Theater. But that was where I want to give a ton of thanks to Sean, because he really gave me a platform to grow as a teacher. So that was kind of where I first started doing more teaching, and I ran I ran a whole class that was kind of exploring like the concept of yes and whether the idea was for everybody to come to their own conclusion about whether, like, do you believe in the philosophy of yes and, why or why not, or how do you come to understand the idea of yes and then I determined who was right or wrong. We left it we left it open
Yeah.
ended. I like that. I like those ideas. I think a lot of times there's like rules, right, in improv, and things are never absolute, right? There's things that tend to work well, or things that you say, hey, maybe if you're learning, that's something that's creates a high degree of difficulty. But exploring yes and was really fun. Got to do a lot of workshops, and that was great. And then I was coaching a Herald team before I left, so really loved working with that group called Forever Boy. They're extremely talented. They were putting on incredible shows, and there was just this like new thing happening there of like more performance slots being made available to guest groups. And so I was kind of watching this community really evolve while I was there, which was fun.
Oh, that's awesome. And I know, so when you were in the Bay Area still working at YouTube, right, at the
Yeah,
time then,
exactly. Yeah.
you brought some of these improv skills and exercises to your team and leadership. Or were you kind of bringing that into your corporate world too?
I was trying to as much as possible. So I was leading like a manager development program at YouTube, which was really cool. We tried to make it as engaging as possible. Always have loved doing, so during my whole tenure at Google, loved doing you know team building exercises for small groups. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely, as like return to office was happening, was doing more of that, whether it was leading small components of a larger meeting with sort of like improv game type stuff, consulting with leaders on sort of ways to make content more engaging, or to help, hey, we have this big team offsite. We're looking for something to get everybody to know each other and get moving. And so I wound up doing a lot of those kinds of mini projects, and then would lead occasionally like longer, workshops focused on communication, which is probably now where I tend to focus a lot of my energy, because I think like a lot that can go wrong in the corporate world gets into communication issues and sort of what
Mhm.
happens. So happy to speak more about that. But yeah, so love doing, I think improv at work is great. It just gives people a different energy. It starts to rewire your brain a little bit. The things that maybe feel threatening or scary at work start to feel less scary when people play together and use different parts of their brain. So I'm a huge proponent of that, among other thoughts I have on communication generally. But I think just getting people playing is just so foundational for good teamwork.
Well, and I have to ask, did you ever do any drama or theater or performance type of stuff in school when you were younger? Or did you really pick this up when you were older, more in your MBA program and stuff?
I did some plays and show. I was in like every club in high school, which I kind of, in hindsight, like I feel like I was just collecting badges of being involved in everything.
Nice.
So yeah, I did get involved. I think they were always eager at my high school for whatever reason. They were always looking for more men to be involved in stuff. So I jumped in, and the drama, I remember like one of the directors was like very excited to have somebody. And I had like, my first 2 years of high school was sort of dabbling with playing football. And I was like, you're not really a football player. So I was like, okay, we're going to go in the other direction. And not that you can, obviously people can do both, but I was like, I'm better
Right.
served here. And yeah, just I had a lot of fun with it, and just performing with a group and doing all that was really great. But yeah, and then I kind of thought that would be it. To be honest, I was like, oh, maybe I'll dabble. My going all the way back to fourth grade. I remember there was like a career project we had to do, and it was like, what career do you want to be? And I was like, stand-up comedian. And then I always liked in school being the
Yes.
person that's like being silly and funny, but trying to like involve the teacher in a way. Like I always wanted to like have the teacher on my side and sort of like not be like trying to be funny in a way that was like helping the education versus like class clown, like distracting from the learning, or at least that's what I thought. Maybe I don't know if anybody would like looked at it differently, but yeah, those are kind of like those foundational pieces of, okay, I've always had an interest in comedy. High school, I had a big interest in theater. And sometimes you have to like, people can just put stuff on the back burner for a while, but it's still kind of there. You just sort of like leave that space sort of almost like it has like a tarp on it in your brain or something. And then you like rip the tarp off and you're like, all right, let's see what's going on here.
I love that. Yeah, I was mostly sports. I've said this on multiple episodes, but I
Yeah. Yeah.
was all sports, like, never did any theater, performance, drama, anything like that. I was just terrified of it, and then I really got into improv in my 30s
Mhm.
and been doing it for the past 5 years, and it's just been, I'll say it, life-changing. I mean, it's just changed my whole perspective on life and the way that I interact with the world and, like, myself that I bring into the world, and yeah, I love that. Things can change or things go on the back burner and you pick them back up or you pick up
Mhm.
new things, and it's all just really fun to explore, learn, and grow.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think so one of the things I'm exploring right now, we actually just last week at the brewery, we did a session on Wednesday and Friday with with the men's and women's teams that make up what's called AFC Ann Arbor. So it's our minor league soccer team.
Yeah.
And that was so fun. Like one of the things I'm really like one of my dreams. That I am a lover of sports, to be honest. I probably have this like pseudo Ted Lasso-y vision that like maybe someday somebody will want me to like come in and just I'll run a workshop for like the Detroit Lions and they'll go and win the Super Bowl, right, or something like that.
Yes.
And
Manifest
so
it, make it happen.
yeah. So the first step on that journey is this. It's such a cool thing. It's this minor league soccer team, like I was saying, and they bring in people from all over the world, right? And so the workshops that I ran, there was this dynamic. Over half, in one case, nearly all, save for two or three people. We're talking about groups that were like in the low teens in size. Almost all the people were non-native English speakers.
Oh,
So
wow.
and I'm not the expert on like history of improv. I love nerding out on like comedy theory, but I'm not always, there's some improv books that are very like, and then this sketch happened and this person was in the audience and this team did it. And it's like very like, it gets a little like what they call like inside baseball, or a little too like, okay, that's only interesting if you like know who all these people are. But I do believe
Yeah.
there's some stuff going to like Viola Spolin, who's one of the foundational improv
Mhm.
people, where I think a lot of the exercises were first created to bridge gaps with ESL folks. So that was really fun, right? Because it's like you start to realize, hey, this is a team. They've got to work together. They're out on the field needing to communicate to perform effectively. And so we did a lot of it just was so cool to see them play. But one of the most fun moments of the whole workshop with the women's team was we did a game called Conducted Gripes, where it's a line game where you've got but it's not like an elimination line game or a step. It's a game where you got five players and everybody gets a different topic. So a topic might be like people that walk too slow, or ice cream, or taking a shower. Like it's just like not very non-controversial topics. And when you point to them, so if you're doing the game, you're sort of conducting. So I'd point to you and
Mhm.
you riff on your topic, and then if I cut you off, you stop. And we let everybody do it in their native language. So it was like this really, because the whole point of the game is it's like a cacophony of normally it's like everybody's speaking English the way I've run this before. And so you just hear all these, it gets really fun because you'll hear one person's complaining about toddlers and another person's complaining about, airplanes. It's just the juxtaposition of these things. And it's sometimes even hard to make out the particulars when you get like all five people speaking at the same time. But it was just so cool because we had Japanese, Spanish, God, like Norwegian. It was like all these different
Oh my
languages,
gosh.
French, and then English. It was just really fun. Like you just start to, and you see people like sometimes I think when you're speaking in a different language, your personality is different, right? And so it was like I think it was very cool for the ladies on the team to see their teammates just not having to process things through having the experience of sort of not being in your home country and speaking the language you're most comfortable speaking. So that was really cool. I hope it translates. I'm watching the win-loss record very closely to see if we can win one for improv.
Yes.
But just as an example of the kinds of things, I think improv could be really helpful for athletics, just in terms of just the camaraderie in the play, but just like being present in the moment, not beating yourself up too hard. If you make a bad pass, are you just like beating yourself up, or do you move on? Right. So kind of like I've got your back mentality of improv, I think is very much aligned to athletics and team performance.
Yeah, I would love to hear we'll have you come on for part 2 once the brewery gets up and running, you have your, few years anniversary, and you can come report back on that, on, like, if you're getting a lot more sports teams, because I used to coach youth volleyball, like,
Hmm.
ages 13 to 17, and this was before I took any improv class, so I would have had no idea and no skills to run those type of exercises. But once I did improv, I was like, "Oh, I wish that I could have brought some of that to my teams and with the girls that I coached." But I do think with youth, I'm sure there's an extra skill set too, because 'cause they're very in their heads, and it's a judgy time too, so
Yeah.
just making it a safe space. And I imagine even for adults too, like, making it a safe space on their teams to make mistakes in these workshops and learn and kind of just have fun while not being on the field or the court. So anyway, I hope you explore that more and get all the athletics teams, young and adult ages, to come take some team building workshops and see how it goes.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. Actually, I've run. It's funny you mentioned that about just kids can be kind of rough with each other, and that's both like through team sports and generally. I've had multiple former colleagues. Actually, I just ran a workshop recently, and it was like sort of like a pseudo birthday, but not really a birthday party. And it was the person's teenager was kind of going through a difficult time of sort of being like unfriended, or people were just not being
Hmm.
kind. And so we ran this thing. It was like an all ages, we had people doing improv from, I think, probably about 12 to 50, kind of in that range. And it was like
Wow.
really cool to see all these different age, people just jump in and do stuff together. And, and some of the stuff just worked so well. And I was like, oh, it's awesome. And they just, watching even the younger people play together when you put them in that mode, it just takes them out of judgment mode. And they just did such a great job. So, you never want to say the thing that I'm very passionate about is it's the only thing. It's going to change everybody's life. But obviously, if you're in this professionally, you start to get those kinds of feelings that it can have a positive difference and help people just feel more comfortable, form new connections, reduce feelings of anxiety, and be better with ambiguity, uncertainty, and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you're kind of going into that kind of niche field of like athletics and then also, of course, team building for corporate and anyone who wants to take a workshop right at your brewery. And kind of to go back to the timeline. So you moved around this time last year, right? Like May,
Hmm.
June 2023 is when you made the move from California to Michigan, right?
Yep.
And so it's been a year up getting this brewery and space up and running. And, we've been chatting all about your passion and like you found this love for improv. I assume you have a love for beer too if you're
Yeah.
opening a brewery, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
How has this year been? I'm sure you've had ups and downs. How do you handle the ups and downs starting a new business?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. I'm trying to be good about calling out the ups in particular. Like we now have hired an additional person, so there's three of us on site most days. There's about to be a fourth, and very quickly from there we'll probably have an extended team of around 8 or 9 people, many of whom are part time. But I mean, we need bar staff, and it helps to our hours are not set up where somebody's probably going to get 40 hours a week necessarily. But if there are a lot of people in the industry that will kind of straddle a few different similar positions at different breweries or venues. So I mean, we're very soon going to have a decently sized team. I think as far as ups go, some of the things I believe in and I'm trying to model, one is let's call out and celebrate when things go well, right? Like, or when somebody's doing a
Yeah.
great job. Are we saying that out loud? And I always say this, like with whether I'm coaching improv or anything else, if you do a scene and somebody goes, "Oh, great job," like that doesn't really tell you anything. Like, what was great about it? What specifically, what were the behaviors, the actions, right? Instead of focusing on a vague descriptor of the outcome. If you thought that was great, well, what made it great? And it's like, oh, there was a very complex emotional state going on where you had multiple emotions that were kind of at play. There was one on the surface, one under the radar, or wow, you two really got on the same page and mirrored each other really well. Can you be specific? And so I'm trying to do that also, kind of using that same mindset at work, right? And it's not perfect. There's stress at times and there's things that get tricky, or your way of doing something might be different from somebody else's way of doing something. And how do you bridge that gap and make room for, other ideas or concepts? But yeah, there were just some definite downs. There's some days where I'm like, what am I doing? Why did I get
Mhm.
involved or do this? Like, that happens not infrequently, so frequently. And it was everything from the person we bought the building from. There were some tricky parts of the negotiation, and so I wouldn't say we had the closest rapport in terms of that deal. So there were many moments where it was like, gosh, I don't know if this is going to happen. Is this up until like the last week? It seemed like things could fall apart and it might not
Oh,
happen, and then
wow.
it just all kind of came together again right before the finish line. And there were a lot of moving pieces because we did an SBA loan, which is secured by the Small Business Administration. And that was paired with funding from a Michigan based bank that is really awesome and very supportive of new ventures. So that was great. A lot of people don't want to lend money, especially in this current environment. It can be tricky to get startup capital. And I'm happy to, if anybody reaches out, I'm happy to talk more about sort of if somebody has a passion or a dream they're trying to do, whether that's an improv theater or something totally different. I think I've learned now like some of the strategies or ideas that are out there. But yeah, so to put that in perspective, have been a lot of downs. I think I mentioned to you before we started recording, just the idea of even we're hoping for a grand opening next month, kind of, and I was kind of hoping middle or early, and this would be June 2024 to use specific language, since and hopefully by the time people are hearing this, we're fully open. But there's also a massive project to get licensing for the stadium of the University of Michigan football team, and so just there's these things that happen where you're like, okay, I think we'll get our license by May, June, and then it's like we've done a lot of the paperwork, but we're looking now more like probably late June, and possibly even like it might turn into like the week of July 4th could certainly be feasible. So,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
about, yeah, I mean, if we're open for July, August, that's going to be key. But yeah, I mean, those have been some of the downs and some of the hiccups. And then you get into a place like, okay, there's a water heater that's broken and has to be something ggets billed. Anytime something's billed as turnkey, just trust that things are gonna take longer than you think. You're gonna have to put more money into stuff.
Mhm.
And so I probably under counted at times. Just it was probably a little too rosy on what some of the like rehab costs would be and some of the rent. Yeah, we didn't even do anything like super major, but I've outside of the bank loan have self funded everything. So it's there's just unexpected things that pop up, and those can be disappointing, but you sort of just problem solve and move through it.
I'm sitting here with just an overwhelmed kind of feeling and look on my face because I mean, I have my LLC for my business, Improbly Speaking, and
Hmm.
I run that out of my house. It's not brick
Yeah.
and mortar. And so, there's so many nuances to owning a physical space. The water heater breaks. You've got to get the water turned on. You got to get a liquor license. I mean, all of these steps that I do not have to worry about as like a
Hmm.
speaker business that I have. And I imagine the hits just keep coming. It's like hit after hit after hit, and it can be easy to be like, "All right, when are the hits gonna stop?" And I don't think they do, right, as a business owner, and you just have to kinda learn to roll with the punches and the hits and find the positives, and eventually, hopefully, you'll look back, next year, and it can be easier to, like, see it later on and be like, "Oh, we handled that so well. We opened in July, August, it was great." But when you're in the thick of things, you're like, like, "I gotta take some
Yeah.
deep breaths here."
And I think just
Er
like asking for help goes a long way. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people very excited to see our business open. So I've tried to be, clear that, hey, if people want to come and help out with stuff, whether, sometimes we're able to, to even compensate for some of that. But yeah, we want, it helps us a lot when people say, hey, I can do this thing to help you, right? Like even sometimes it's big things, sometimes it's small things, like somebody hand makes wood signs with like laser I don't know, it's like kind of like laser, uh, almost like stains the wood and makes signs from that. And like
Oh,
this guy
cool.
who's a great improviser, he's like, hey, can I make your bathroom sound? I'm like, absolutely. That takes one less thing I'm thinking about, right? And he's now doing all this work to make sure it's like ADA compliant. And it's like, awesome, thank you. That was something that hadn't been, super high on our radar. And so you just get help from people, and that goes a long way. We had a huge initial project was getting the Airbnb set up, right? Because that
Oh,
right
yeah.
now is actually one of our main sources of revenue. So we have guests coming in. We have our third guest there, and
Look at
that's done really
him.
well. Yeah, we've had friends come by to help put together furniture, help move stuff. So I think it's like you always have people that want to see you succeed, and so whether it's formally hiring people or hiring hands that can help, there's lots of people out there looking for just like gigs and things that they can do to help out. And then there's just people that are like, I care so much about what you're doing, I do it for free. And you appreciate everybody because it all kind of helps the thing work. But I think like something, I don't know if you're getting into this kind of with your business, but I think one of the exercises as a business owner you have to go through at some point is, what are the best uses of my time and talents versus everything that the business needs to succeed. And so
Mhm.
I'd say a good example of that right now is I'm making all of our posters in Canva, right? And like I think I'm doing an okay job. I've learned enough to like do that and have our
Yeah.
branding look pretty consistent. But it takes me a while to be in Canva, and I'm not like naturally a visual design person, but the business needs somebody doing that. I'm responding to every customer service inquiry right now that we get, right? And some of that is really positive because it keeps me very in tune, with what people want. And I've had one of the weird things, or not, it's not weird, but one of the, I've never heard of this before, but one of the themes that has popped up this week is people wanting a midday improv class. And so I'm like, that's
Oh.
strange. I've never considered that, but there's people that are retired or just have midday flexibility. And I'm like, okay,
Oh, yeah.
we've got these, like, sometimes we have these perceptions like, no, improv's at 7. That's when it is, and I'm like, well, if there's, I certainly don't want to post something that doesn't fill, but if there's enough people, or what if it looked like doing that in a community, I haven't done a lot of improv I've generally done more younger ages. We do have a pretty, diverse age range of people that take classes or have started taking classes at Hearsay and just are generally interested in improv in the area. But I'm like, I think improv for seniors is great. There should be more of that, right? And does that look like doing something innovative at the theater? Does it look like bringing more of what we can do out in the community and doing stuff on site? But yeah, so and going back to the point is just, sometimes you're doing something that long term isn't the right activity for
Right.
you, but in the moment it might be, well, somebody's got to do it, or B, it's helping me to reduce blind spots, right? If I totally outsourced handling all of our email communication, that might reduce the number of hours I'm spending on that, but it also would make me less cognizant of the feedback we're getting and what people are saying when they're just sending us general inquiries into the inbox. And so, there's ways to bridge that gap. Of course, if you have like if you're getting help from folks in the right way, you're sort of having the right stuff funnel through. But yeah, I think it's like finding the right stuff for you to prioritize. And there's kind of that, what is it? There's that XY graph. And it's kind of like, I think it's like urgent and important. It's like how, like, kind of like looking at like, when does something need to be done by,
Yeah.
and what's the importance level. And I think the very dangerous thing in any business is to disregard the things that are not timely but are really important. Because a lot of times there are things that
Mm.
are like, they're really strategically valuable activities, but they don't feel like pressing, like nothing's on fire, right? If I rent our space for tomorrow to a group for a private function, the space better be available tomorrow at 5 p.m. If I'm not doing a good enough job of curating local businesses that might want to do workshops with us, that doesn't ever feel on fire, but it's a missed opportunity that's like very core to what we're trying to do, right? Or so those are the things that I'm thinking about in terms of running this new business.
In your long-term vision, what do you see as kind of your main focuses? So you're gonna kind of focus on leading the workshops, kind of the team building, corporate workshops, any kind of applied improv. Do you lead any of the kind of performance-based improv classes too?
Yeah, we did like this 4-week class, which that was like really fun. Usually classes in the area, and I think at most theaters tend to be more, like 7 to 8 weeks. We're doing like our classes for full terms are like 7 weeks plus a show in the eighth week. And something we've started to do is all of our shows are the same night of the class people have signed up for, which is so subtle. But I've seen offerings where it's like, hey, your class is every Monday, but then your class show happens to be on like a Thursday. And people are like, well, I took the class on Monday because that's when I'm available. Right.
It
And
makes so much sense. Yeah, subtle
yeah.
thing, but it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so we did where we're kind of experimenting right now as we're like building our teacher roster with 4 week offerings. So we did this offering called Dust the Rust Off, and so it was like we were getting ready to do a lot of work in the space, but we had we're using our tap house currently for classes until we get open to the public and have our theater fully built out. Which since I haven't fully explained that, our theater is going to be this like contained event space inside of a larger brewery. So it's kind of like a
Oh,
contained room inside of a long rectangle brewery. And then there's like a small, not quite square, but like smaller rectangular space that'll be like a 45-person house theater, just to give context. But yeah, so we're doing these 4 week offerings. I taught Dust the Rust Off to one group. I get the most joy teaching improv. It's like the thing that I really feel drawn to do. I think like I just have a very particular idea about how to have a positive feedback culture within a class. And I think a lot of times there's no feedback, or the feedback is vague, or it's, people are like, oh, I gave lots of feedback and the feedback is great job. Like I was saying earlier, it's like, that's not helping people. So, you of course want to give people a lot of time to just play and have fun and explore things, but also find those key moments where you can help somebody kind of cement a learning or understand something. Or because I think we've all been in those scenes where, gosh, that felt a little harder than it needed to be, or man, that just,
many, many
yeah,
of those.
yeah. And so it's like, sometimes I think people just need, and that's where I love like the comedy theory side. So I love bringing that into when I teach, and sort of, we just had Brian James O'Connell visit us,
Yeah,
who's
BOC.
also from LA, BOC, as he's known, and he's one of the big proponents of like position play, just talking about sort of like what role are you in the scene in regards to both the other characters and the environment. Like that was something that wasn't really a part of my initial education, but has just become very foundational. Of I do think a lot of where people get stuck is they're not maybe playing the scene that they're in, or both parties haven't sort of gotten on the same page about what kind of scene they're in. So anyway, yeah, I'm teaching a lot, bringing those concepts to bear, and we're trying to get other folks in as well. And just I think like these 4 week offerings are a really good way to get people who've had some improv experience to come check us out. We are in an area where there's a couple theaters in the greater Detroit area. There's another theater in the town over from us called Ypsilanti that's building out programming, and they're renting some space and sort of figuring some stuff out on their side. But there are some different theaters, and there's also a civic theater that has an improv program. So there's kind of 5 programs in the greater area, and so you want to give people a good reason to come check out what you're working on, and also be very encouraging to see what is going on at other theaters, right? Because everybody has sort of a different style, different things they focus on, different opportunities to audition or to get a performance slot. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of what I'm doing right now. I am also leading most of our workshops at the moment,
Mhm.
but would also at some point probably tap some people to help with some of that facilitation. But for now, I'm primarily the person doing those.
I love the idea of you take a class with your group, you finish the class and then you can hang out in the tap room, get
Yeah.
a drink. There's space because, I mean, there's so many times after practice or a class that like we hang outside and talk outside of this like parking lot or something, and it's now you've curated this space where people can hang out and get a drink and just stay and chat. I assume that's kind of the model you're going for, or even team building, right? Like they do a workshop and then there's a happy hour or something.
Yes.
Such a cool model.
Yeah, so it's such a corny corporate word, but synergy comes to mind a lot,
Uh,
right? Like we need synergy to hit our Q3 earnings, but I'm not using it in that sense. I think it's that, yeah, exactly that. I just wrote a very long letter to just kind of update all of our followers and people of what's going on at the theater. We're kind of getting close to that range of hoping to be open, and sort of just want to give everybody a sense of here's what we're doing. We've got something for Saturday night that we recently cast, just kind of getting a few experienced people in the area. We have an open audition for a Friday night concept, and just want to kind of put everything out there that we're working on and give people the information. So yeah, I think like synergy is a huge deal. At Pointless, the previous theater that I was explaining that was in Ann Arbor, what would also happen is people wanted to linger after a show, but the tap house area was also the audience. So it was like kind of a diagonal stage, a big, a relatively, decently small to medium sized seating area in the tap house. And then what would happen is after shows, people would kind of stand and talk a little bit, maybe have one more drink there. And then people kind of wanted to go out, and there weren't a ton of options for people to sit. You've just been on your feet performing for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're hungry, and there were some like kind of light snacks and stuff. And they did a great job with the space they had, but there wasn't like the opportunity to have a kitchen there, and there weren't like tables for people to just kind of like relax and sit down. So I know it, like in talking to Jason, I think that was always a thing that was like, oh, it's kind of a bummer. You sort of watch all this business go out the door and down the street to another business. And it's like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
if we've got food and drinks, then people stay for that. If we've got food and drinks, non-improv people come in and try you out because they're just
Right.
interested in that. And then they say, oh, I was just here for a beer. I'm visiting Ann Arbor. And they're like, you have a show tonight? Yeah, we've got an improv show, right? And then they check that out. Or they live locally and they're like, oh, let me go see the show. And then, it's the whole cycle of you're pitching your classes at the show, at the classes you're pitching people to come check out shows or to hang out. You take a class, and then you may want to sit out, and we're going to do this like upscale carnival food menu. So we actually just hired a chef. That's our third person I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to have these like Korean corn dog kind of concept, and the plan is to pay homage to like major comedy cities, which we hope someday Ann Arbor is on that list. But we'll have like modifiers for where you can do like a Chicago style dog that might have a pickle spear and like poppy seeds. So we'll have corn dogs. We'll have probably some chicken fingers. We'll have, maybe eventually Fritz. We're trying to work on our fryer situation. We have a food truck on site that we're cooking out of. So we're just trying to
Oh,
navigate.
cool.
Yeah, we're trying to navigate like what we can reasonably do in there that's not going to overcomplicate things, just to kind of get the ball rolling. But exactly what you said. And then even, stuff like people come to classes. I've already had some referrals of, hey, I'm taking a class, but my team is doing like a workshop and we need somebody to come facilitate and do that. And it's like, awesome. Yeah, please. We'd love to do that. Um,
Exactly.
we're
That's
doing an
awesome.
improv for networking event. I mean, I've joined some of these groups, and it's like they're always looking for fun and new things to engage members. So myself and another guy, Matt, we're teaching this. It's an hour and a half, and the idea is come and we'll kind of talk to you about how improv can apply to networking. We're going to do some, a lot of it is, I think, like our basic, and I'll, if this goes better elsewhere, you can let me know. But, one of our kind of our basic philosophy is like, be present in the moment, right? So what are those things that
Mm-hmm.
help you be present? Listen really deeply, and listen with your ears and eyes. In the recent soccer team workshop that we did, I was talking about that. Like, you've got a lot of visual data. You're sort of listening with your eyes when you take in the visual data, or you're sort of like feeling out where somebody is before they're there. They're like behind you, but you can sort of perceive that, which I'd all categorize as sort of a different type of listening. And then contributing boldly, right? If you're running your own business or in a certain role that requires this, networking can be really not fun at times. It can feel like
Mm-hmm.
small
Yeah.
talk, or I'm just selling this, or how do I get out of how do I exit sort of if I'm stuck in a conversation.
Yep.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we actually have a really fun exercise to help people kind of focus on, like, how do you focus on helping people solve their problems versus just, I've got this thing I've got to sell you. I'm like, home insurance, home
Oh, that's
insurance,
a good
home
idea.
insurance. And more like, how do you focus on needs and sort of connecting people and being helpful versus being in that super, super sales role. And also, hey, sometimes you're networking, it just maybe isn't a good fit, but just kind of shifting how people think and tapping into their why statement. Right? I'm happy to talk about that for the theater and this business, but just we want to help people uh, have a why statement that feels very authentic and very motivating. I think there's that book, Simon Sinek, that start with why. And I think so often we start with
Mm-hmm.
like, people are like, oh, tell me about your business. And you just answer the what. I sell car insurance, right? Versus like, why is the why behind that? If you really stop and say, well, why am I doing this? You could be selling any kind of insurance. It's like, getting in an accident is really scary if you're driving. And at those key moments, I help people feel protected, or that they've got somebody in their corner who's not going to treat them poorly, or a company that's going to kind of discard you because you've had something negative happen. It's like, yeah, okay, that starts to feel more, that's not the thing that you're selling. It's the sort of the what motivates you to be in that line of work in the first place. So we're gonna do some work on that with people that I hope they find helpful.
I love that. I recently did a networking session for a virtual conference, and certainly virtual is much different from in person. I think the conversation flows differently in person, but one of the skills that I like to bring in, maybe this is useful or whatever for future things, but I like to do A to C thinking training.
Yeah.
So, in improv, we get a suggestion and you can A to C off of it. So, apple makes me think of tree, which makes me think of a bird on a tree. And you could go apple to bird and find a story from bird instead of from apple. And I like to use that in virtual networking presentations because sometimes people get in their heads and they're like, okay, I'm stuck in this conversation. This person is talking about this thing. I have nothing to contribute, or I feel like I have nothing to contribute. A to
Hmm.
see it and be like, "Oh, you're talking about that. That reminds me of this thing, kind of relates to this." And you tell your story, and it's a flow of storytelling rather than just like, "I do this, can I help you?" It's like, let's get into kind of some stories. And certainly there's other skills that go into it of like making it quick and efficient and not rambling on, and a
Yeah.
balance of conversation. I mean, there's so many skills with networking, but I like A to C thinking for short kind of networking workshops. I think it's a fun skill to have.
I think that's so good. Yeah, it's because it does sometimes become difficult for people. That's always one of those when I feel like with new improvisers, it kind of blows their mind a little bit because you get
Mhm.
the suggestion of pineapple, and then immediately the scene is like, "Hey, Dad, I cut you up some pineapple. Here you go." And it's like we get so hung up on the thing itself versus the things around it. And so, yeah, I think that's all about listening, taking a pause, because it's not like sometimes it's a perception that improv, everybody's like quick witted and it's just like boom, 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 boom. Like you have more
Yeah,
time than you think sometimes to take something in and then find bird from apple, right? Like it doesn't have to be like apple, bird, bird, everything's bird now, bird, 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 right? Like it's, you've got a second, especially if you're in one of those moments. Yeah, what is it? And I think that's kind of conversation. But I think like allow yourself to be more creative, right? With
yeah.
how you converse, which is such an important life skill, because sometimes you just feel like it, and we've been in those improv scenes, and a conversation with a stranger is kind of an improv scene. And
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it is.
so yeah, like how can you own that and kind of have that person's back, which is almost like a different way of thinking about it of, hey, how can I have fun with this person in this moment? And truly, I don't mean have fun, make fun of, but I mean like have fun in the sense of, yeah, hey, they're riffing on this topic. Like I get to jump in as well. And that might spark something that then feels a little bit more organic and flowing. Sometimes we're stuck on one thing, but yeah.
Exactly. That's so cool. I can't wait to hear how, because I hope you can do more of those. It sounds like you're kind of casting a wide net because obviously improv skills can really relate and apply to so many
Yeah.
things in life. So that's awesome.
And it's interesting, right? Like, something I am thinking a lot about right now is kind of I guess it's kind of a risk, right? I think there's a risk that you're casting such a wide net that you're not focused, but we're also at a point where we don't truly know the things that are going to get the most traction. And so
Yeah,
there's a lot of experimentation right now. And I think we're at a phase where it's okay to try things that don't work. It might be brewing a beer that's a little experimental. It might be trying a class. I'd put together a class that didn't fill, and that was a bummer. Mostly everything else we've put on has filled quite well. And we're like doing great. But like one class didn't
right.
fill. Okay. It was a little experimental, experimentative. And so it was kind of like, okay, maybe, it could have been the time, could have been this or that. But I think not getting too hung up on the things that don't go well, but you can kind of put more was like wood or sort of like fuel on the fire when something's like really working. I always think about that. There's a principle for team building that is kind of like the teams that win at complex game, almost like escape room style games and stuff. There's this principle that the teams that do really great, they just are willing to try and fail at a lot of things. So sometimes like if it was you and me and let's say four other people and we were assigned a fairly complex task, you know, there's this question of like, we could have a lot of discussion and debate before we ever, let's say we were tasked to build like the strongest structure we can build out of clay or something, right? And you figure out, okay, is it triangular base? Is it pillars? What does it look like? I'm thinking of like stuff like, in like grade school where you do like an egg drop or something and you're trying to like
Mhm.
create a container that can do it. And so it's this idea that the teams that perform best, they try and fail at a lot of things and then they figure out something that works really well. And you just put a lot on that. So I'm kind of using that philosophy a lot right now, but I'm trying to do it in a way that doesn't, kind of overload the other people that have sort of jumped in on this project. And it doesn't overly confuse our members, guests, customers, potential partners, right? Because if you're like, if you're doing stuff that's really A to C from like a line, sort of like business lines, then I think that can get
Yeah,
tricky. But
for sure.
all roads sort of lead back to community for us. Ultimately, that's kind of our North Star. Our mission is crafting community through joy and laughter. So if we are doing something, I think there's a question of, does it craft community? Is it through joy and laughter? And if it's answering those things, yes, then it's very potentially or very likely to be a good fit for us. And that will often extend beyond improv, right? Like I sort of am hoping for this like vibrant community space where, whatever sort of hobby or nerdy thing you get into, like if you want to come have board game night, like there might be an open space every night, but hey, we want to sort of find space for people to do the
Yeah.
things they're passionate about. And I think how people feel when they come to hearsay will matter more than like literally
Yeah.
how much they like the drinks or how much they like the food. It's that, as maybe corny, but it's that principle. Like you always remember how people made you feel. And we want to create a really warm space that you're like, this is just good vibes, good people. And then I think people will go along for you on that ride if you're maybe confusing them at times, or our parking's really tricky. That's one of the weird things that we deal with. Is like we have limited
Oh,
parking, so we've got deals with our neighbors, and it's, well, you better make people feel pretty darn good when they come out if they've got to sort of take some extra steps to get to your front door after they park, right? So it's just, because sometimes those like little micro decisions of, do I go here or here? And there's these little, I think if you're making people feel really good, warm and fuzzy when they're coming to visit you, it's a pretty good indicator they're going to want to come back. That's how I'm thinking about it,
yeah.
at least.
I love those questions. Does it craft community or build community? And does
Yeah.
it create joy and laughter? And if it's yes and yes, then that's probably a good experiment to try in your experimentation phase.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we want, community gets into, for us, like a lot of our goals around representation and inclusion, right? Like
Yeah.
improv in particular is a very, it's a very white male heavy game for, a lot of its existence. And then craft beer is a lot of it's like, it's kind of guys that look like me. It's guys in their 30s with beards, and so we're trying to have a dynamic where we've got a lot of representation through everything we're doing, and that's part of crafting community as well, right? And then the crafting, like we really try to choose every word very intentionally, because even crafting, right? There's craft beer. We want our beer to be at a
Mm.
certain quality level. We want the shows that we do to be at a high level, right? And you always hear there's that dynamic in improv that comes up a lot, which is, I don't know if this has come up for you before, Dana, but like community and quality can sometimes feel at odds, I think, for some theaters. Meaning, are you at
Yeah.
all, I think on one polar end of the extreme, we want to produce the highest quality shows come hell or high water, and whoever doesn't like that can take a hike? Or are you more like, we want everybody to get a chance, we're making all stage time available to everybody, we're cycling through things, and we may not always make casting decisions based on quote unquote who got the strongest maybe marks or feedback from somebody evaluating, and I think those are the two extremes, right? Of course, you're probably somewhere on that spectrum. Like, how much are you giving opportunities for the greener performers that are maybe newer to it? How much are you leaning on a super experienced sort of population to drive entertainment? And those things come into play, right? And it's like, how do you, we kind of want to do elements of both, right? Or kind of minimize the downsides of only anchoring to one of those two extremes and sort of get the benefits of, cool, there's things to look forward to if I continue with improv, or this is a business that's open to like my strange hobby if I can kind of find an angle where it sort of fits in with what's going on here. So yeah, anyway, that's one of the other things we're really thinking a lot about.
I'm just blown away. Honestly, Tony, I'm so inspired by your journey. one, just going from corporate space and feeling like, okay, I like this, but I feel like I could do more. I'm summarizing a bit, but I feel like I could do
Yeah.
more. And then really just going for it and listening to your gut and being like, I'm going to make this big change. I mean, this past year plus has been full of changes, and it sounds like you've just been handling it in stride and so well. I mean, I gotta ask, do you use any improv skills as a business owner to kinda help you through this past year of big changes? And I am, selfishly asking because, I'm in a year of changes too. I'm expecting my
Yeah.
little girl in 2 months, and I'm really hoping that some of these improv skills, plus everything else, gets me through this year of changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I'm very excited for you and your
Well,
family
thank
that's growing, and and beyond the podcast, the business you're growing, or with your LLC. So yeah, I think improv for me has been super helpful. I think about improv ideas. I think that some of the items that first come to mind for me are, in improv, we talk a lot about, I got your back, right? It's something you say a lot before a
Mhm.
show. And a lot of people have had my back. I think there was a phase for me where I would have had maybe too much pride to admit, hey, this is difficult, or we're going to need an additional funding to kind of put everything together and really make it happen. And I think that, sometimes that idea of I've got to do everything myself can get in the way. And I probably haven't like perfectly nailed out. There's still some things I'm doing that I probably need to like get even more help on, or do some of that. But I think understand there's people in your corner that want to support you.
Mhm.
We put out a membership that wasn't inexpensive. And I think for many people, for some folks, maybe that it was an easy yes. For other folks, it was a pretty large investment. We've had about 70 people join as a member before we ever open our doors. So
Wow.
that's pretty cool. And I'll be honest, I set a wild stretch goal of like 300. So there was a moment for me, and I think this is actually a good encapsulation. So when I first put that out, I was like, I think we can get 300 people to sign up in 2 weeks. And that was so overly optimistic. But what was really important is you can't let that stretch goal get in the way of being like, holy crap, 70 people believe in what we're doing enough to jump in and say, heck yeah, here's my $200. I want to support this project and be a founding member. Right. And so I keep using this phrase that really throws people off at first. And the phrase is, I'm happily dissatisfied with everything happening. And by that, I mean, if I'll try to like explain what I mean. I would say I'll start with the dissatisfied part. I'm dissatisfied because we haven't reached some of the things that we, where we want to go, right? Like we just, by the nature of, if you set a vision, you're not there yet, right? Or it's not a vision, it's reality. So if you have a vision of where you want to go, there's some level of dissatisfaction with the current state because you haven't attained that vision that you're trying to reach. And so I think like it's being dissatisfied without being like grumpy or mopey or upset,
Mm.
or we missed this goal, everybody's fired, everybody is got, like it's not that dynamic. It's I'm dissatisfied because we're not there yet, but I'm happy because so many people have supported us. The day to day of what I'm doing is extremely fun, right? I'm having fun every day. I don't, when I on the like leaving a corporate job, like I was by the end of it, I wasn't loving my corporate job very much. I was very ready to like up and go, and it was probably a couple of years overdue.
Yeah.
A lot of people talk about like by the end of it, I just by Sun, it's like that Sunday, or you start to feel like Sunday scaries, and you're like, I don't want to do
Mhm.
my job tomorrow. I wasn't
Yep.
enjoying it anymore, and it had run its course. And so, I now am in a mode where I almost rarely know what day of the week it is because I'm working every day, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to go do my job every day. I'm happy, but I'm not satisfied because, we haven't gotten to where we want to be yet. Right. So I think it's like a sustainable approach. I'm not saying this will work for everyone because I've said this to some people and I think their brain went into a pretzel because it's almost like a binary of you've got to be either happy or sad or dissatisfied. But it's like, I think the really key thing is find ways where you're enjoying the journey. If it's always about the end state of the vision, then you're going to miss the things that do make you happy day to day. And like, how do you be happy and dissatisfied at the same time? It's that you've got this thing you want to get to and you're not there yet. So you're not satisfied, but you're happy because you're doing what you love and you're learning, you're growing, you're building skills. So that's kind of like one of those mindsets I've channeled. And I think for me, it's helped me. People can be so hard on themselves. I think when I say that, people are like, oh my God, don't
Oh
be
yeah.
so hard on yourself, is always what people say. Or like, don't be hard on yourself. And I'm like, I'm not being hard on myself. I'm being really kind to myself. I'm being hard on like, yeah, I want to make this vision happen and I want to get to this state, but also enjoy the journey, right? And really be happy day to day, and which I am very much so, and like what we're doing. So I don't know if that's like a good like I'm trying to apply that to improv. It's a
Oh, it definitely fits. I think
yeah,
it
like
fits for sure.
you might like it's kind of like teams get really hard on themselves about it. Oh my God, that set was, people are like, oh, like, great set. You guys were awesome. And you're like, okay, we haven't reached like the pinnacle of what we want to do. Like maybe there's still stuff you think could be better, but are you happy? Can you stop and say, hey, we had an awesome set. It was really great. We may not be like, and maybe we never get to our vision. And that's kind of maybe in some ways it's almost the point of, you may not ever hit like what you think is even possible, but you're having fun, you're enjoying things, and you're continuing to get better, but in a way that feels sustainable. And I think that's a really important check about whether there's a healthy mentality around this, like being happily dissatisfied.
I think that's a almost kind of an alternative of yes and
Yeah.
too, just to kind of branch off of that because you're like, yes, we're doing things and I can't wait for it to grow more and
Yeah.
get bigger. Yes, we're here and I want to get here. And I'm recognizing the reality of the situation that we're doing both right now. It's kind of I'm kind of maybe reaching, but also I think it is a slight version of yes and happily dissatisfied.
Yeah, I was saying earlier, I teach a class on yes and I feel like this does come up. I don't think I definitely did not invent this idea, but there's this piece of your character doesn't have to want to do the thing that the other character wants to do, but what you should do is accept the reality of what they're saying, right? And I always think of this one scene that is now I've told like two of my like more embarrassing where I was like, I wasn't, this is probably like more like unhappily dissatisfied, but there was a scene I always remember like the first scene of like the year-long run I was describing earlier. Like a scene got set up that people are just like eating in an Olive Garden, and at some point I just was like, we're not in an Olive Garden, we're in an alley. And I like it was like one of those things that like I instantly regretted it, but I just changed the location and made everybody kind of having some sort of like a mental condition where you wouldn't know where you are. And it was like, okay, that's a really rough move to do with people, right? And so it's like I have to talk now. It's what you've got to do. Saying yes is accepting reality. It doesn't mean your character is happy about reality. It's just if I say, hey, have a seat in the dentist chair, and you're like, you're a giraffe at the zoo. I'm like, okay, well, what scene are we doing here? And then the and is, yeah, like we're gonna build, but accepting your reality, but also embracing the fact that I will also have contributions to make to get us to this, kind of Craig Kukowski talks about like chiseling. You start with a scene as like as vague as it could possibly be, and then you chisel down to the very specific scene.
Yeah.
And so it's if you start to chisel and then I'm suddenly working on a different piece of marble, well, now we're not even doing the same scene. But if we start chiseling together, if I accept the reality of the piece we're going to carve, and then I'm adding to that, to me, that's the ending part where we're going to, cool, now it's my job to accept your reality and help us, whether it's things like if this is true, what else is true, or what information am I contributing that help us get to this end state of a completed improv scene, right? So I think that's how I would think about like, and there's maybe a vision for the types of scenes we want to do where we feel really connected and really, wow, we were just such in flow state there, and the audience was loving what we did, and you love having those moments where somebody edits your scene and the crowd is still dying, is laughing, and everybody's like, oh my God, that was so good. And almost, like that's great when you get to that point, but it all starts with like accepting the reality of the information your scene partner is giving you.
Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing some of your not so great improv moments because we've
Oh,
all had
sure.
those. And we've all made those mistakes and we have totally changed the scene or the reality and like it's not even on purpose. It might be nerves or it might just be a panic or it's just what your brain went to there's no malice. It's just what
Right.
happened. And, we all do it, we've all had it, and so, thank you for just admitting that and sharing those stories because they've been great stories too, but you can't have those great scenes and moments without kind of the learning moments too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's stuff like, I'm now spending a lot of my time working on workshops. And there's stuff that like you try an activity and it doesn't work perfectly and you tweak it. Right. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes there's this perception of like across the board, we should always be analyzing and reevaluating what we're doing. And yeah, we want to keep getting better and growing. Right. I think at the core, I think being satisfied on some level is being stagnant. So I think it's like
Mm.
there's kind of
Mhm.
some I feel like there's like the Hamilton song about being satisfied. I feel like I don't know if you've listened to Hamilton or watched
Oh,
Hamilton,
yeah.
but it's
I'll
like
never be
I'm never
satisfied.
satisfied. Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody needs to hear me sing. But um, yeah. So I do think about that a lot. But is there a way to maybe my twist on that is like being happy with that fact? Because if you're fully satisfied, like there's kind of like a what's the point? You either just move on to something new and challenge yourself in a new way, or I guess you find a new challenge or a new goal. But yeah, I think there's room for more people to be vulnerable, and I think a lot of us are. We've got core services we're offering, or we've got things that we're making available, and I think there could be room for more of us to maybe embrace that idea of, yeah, I've tried stuff that has, gone amazing and been really fun. I've tried stuff that was like, that was a bit of a miss. And you keep refining the more you do it. I think the reps go a long way. And yeah, just learning some of these nuances of, okay, what works for this type of group, what works for that type of group. And then even two groups are like, these seem like similar groups, and group B wound up being very different for some reason. What happened? Yeah, it's always fascinating.
Tony, I gotta ask you, I mean, my dream too, of course, is to go full-time in my business, and
Yeah.
improv is my passion, public speaking is my passion, so kind of putting all the cards on the table a bit of, like, going all in on my passion, and you hear stories, in general of people who follow their passion and then they get tired of their passion,
Mm,
right? Or, like, they're doing so much in the business that, like, the passion starts to not be the passion anymore.
mhm.
I know you're still kinda new, a year into this business, and you said you're not getting the Sunday scaries because you don't even know what day it is right now.
Yeah.
Do you worry about that a little bit, or there's just so many avenues to go down and things to explore that you just don't think you'll get tired?
Yeah, I don't know. I've had people close to me say you're going to burn out, there could be truth in that, just because I am putting a lot into this. I think, I mean, that there's a few pieces of this. I think one is our business is pretty unique because there's almost like 10 things in one. Right, I'm like an innkeeper,
Yeah,
a sort of generalist manager right now, a managing director sort of the theater. I'm sort of doing some coaching type stuff. I'm teaching classes, right? I'm our marketing person, which I didn't think I'd ever be that. I'm doing like,
right.
Canva work. So there's all these hats to be worn, and that's keeping it fresh. I think as I have to like focus on fewer things. Yeah, I do wonder if that will happen. What I'm feeling right now is, we've already sketched out sort of like where we want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And so I think I'm feeling very motivated, to do those things. And they look like, there's a certain scale we want to get to. There's a certain way in which we want Ann Arbor to really feel like it's on the improv map, where you'd be like, and this is a dream, right? It always sounds crazy when you say something. It's like you'd be like LA, Chicago, Ann Arbor, Michigan. Like you'd almost say those things in
Yes,
in
and
one
make it
sentence and
happen.
not laugh, right? Or Detroit's already has a great reputation for improv and a really nice festival. Ann Arbor is sort of in that mix, but it's sort of its own thing. It's kind of a weird dynamic. I think we see ourselves as connected and separate in some ways. We're about 40-ish minutes from Detroit by car.
Oh,
So we're
okay.
very close. And so we're sort of fit in, but we sort of are our own thing a little bit too. And our audiences are very different as well. Ann Arbor is it's a college town, a lot of people with graduate degrees. You can go pretty, you can definitely, the weirder and more obscure references or author references, and people kind of eat that stuff up. And there's just a lot of theater lovers here. So people can go definitely quite emotional and resonate. But yeah, so where was I going with that? Where so
Passion,
I think
following
passion,
your
yeah.
passion. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think okay, if I were thinking from, this will be a slight tangent, but I think like one thought I have is I think the important thing, and maybe what I wish I'd even done a little bit more of to fully validate, is there's this idea of prototyping. There's a book called Design Your work life. I think we have a follow-up. It's like design your life. But there's a concept that if you really think you want to do something, can you test it on a smaller scale that's safer? I think for a lot of people, that starts to look like a side hustle, right? And so maybe you're
Right.
doing speaking engagements while you're still working a job that has W-2 income that's right, like giving you sort of what you need in that role. I think for a lot of people too, it comes down to like, where are you? Who are you partnered with? What does that look like? What other resources are you bringing to the table? I'll just be very vulnerable. In my marriage, like we're at a point now where like my wife's career has got to the point where sort of I had been in my previous career. So there's almost like her bump up was sort of compensating for the fact that I'm now taking a temporary step back and not earning a lot until
Yeah.
this business gets up and running. And so partner selection becomes really important, right? If I had a different type of partner that was very much looking for me to be a 100% provider at all times, in that type of a relationship, we'd probably be having a lot more conflict. I think it'd be very hard for me to be doing what I'm doing, but I have the full blessing and support of my wife, which is
Mhm.
giving me that, I don't feel pressure on that side. So on the prototyping front, though, I think it's like, where can you experiment? So I think there's great examples of this, right? Somebody wants to dabble in painting, right? Well, cool. Make some paintings and get feedback from your friends or see what people say. And I'm not saying it's that I'm not trying to like downplay the profession or the arts anyway, but there are lots of craft arts fairs and things where you can get into and show your work and see what the response is, right? Like there's often these like low barrier to entry ways to sort of test out the thing you're passionate about. And then I think feel that out and make sure it's something you want to really go into. So for me, I think it was like delivering lots of workshops, sort of using improv in my leadership and coaching practices. I invested in another brewery, which I haven't talked a lot about, but like I invested in a friend's brewery and sort of tracked that coming
Oh,
online. And so
nice.
kind of keeping, seeing the pros, cons, challenges, great moments in that, it gave me some sense of what to expect. And so it just helped me understand like, hey, things are going to move slower. You're going to think, it's two steps forward, one back, or one forward, two back. So I kind of had done a few things that at least gave me some confirmation that this was a good career step. But I think it's a balancing of all of these factors. What are you passionate about? What resources and support do you have? And if somebody's single, that's a different story. But if you're in a partnered relationship, what does that partnership look like? And I just think, are there ways to explore what you're trying to do? A lot of advice winds up being like, can you safely take steps in that direction? Because I think to an outsider, it probably looks like one day I was working at YouTube, then I just threw it all away, and now I'm doing a theater, right? And it's like, well,
Exactly.
there were some things to, it wasn't so like one day, right? There were a lot of moments.
Yeah.
I mean, and to some degree, it is drastic. It's not like there was like an intermediate career, but there were. I've taught a lot of improv. I've done a lot of corporate workshops, and I did those internally. And I would say for a lot of people, hey, is there a way internally, if you're working for somebody else or for a large company, are there ways for you to build the skills you want in your current role as sort of a side hustle within your own job to get your next step? And some companies have a culture where, hell no, you've got to function, do that function, don't do anything
Mhm.
else. But there's other companies that, whether it's just their ethos or their desire to retain people, they make space for those 10% roles or 20% roles. And I've seen quite a few people in my network have parlayed a 10% or 20% project into their next career, whether that was an internal role transfer, a similar job at another company, or going out on their own. And I've seen quite a few friends, start companies in the last year. I feel like I'm just seeing more people have that entrepreneurial itch. In the tech world, there have been a lot of layoffs. I watched a lot of people get laid off. And I think
Mhm.
that said, even friends, even dating like people in your position, like about to have a child, they bring a child into the world, and folks in that boat were laid off. And I think that's terrible,
Yeah.
right? That's not how I would operate my company. And I watched Google do that to many people who I know care about, people with lots of commitments and cares. And hey, it is a business. I'm not saying like, but I think there's a different way I would want to do things. And the only way for me to have a stronger voice in that is to start my own company. Right. And so for me, that became a big deal. And then just realizing that I've hit a point where it's like, okay, what am I getting and what am I giving up? Right. I'm probably giving up this year a lot of trips, a lot of vacations, a lot of, extra splurges because I'm like, okay, everything's funneling into this business. But I went in with eyes wide open, right? I didn't do this and say, yeah, I'll launch this business and I'll then be abroad all the time and going all over the country to do
Oh,
festivals and
right.
things. Like my eyes are wide open that that's not going to be the reality for a while. And so, I think that's key too. What are you willing to give up to get the thing that you think you want more of, right? And if you're not having whether it's a conversation or writing that down or some other exercise on the front end, I think you're probably omitting some of the things that should be part of your sort of decision criteria to, sort of move forward with an ambitious career change or let things evolve for a while until you sort of make a decision on where you are.
And for the record, I think you could do your passion as your job and be totally fulfilled and
Yeah.
happily satisfied as well. I think that question often comes up of people who are naysayers or who don't see your vision or just, maybe they would never take that risk or whatever. And so I think as a person who is taking risk like you might get asked that question, and then that can get into your head sometimes, "Well, will I burn out?" And your answer is no. You're like, "I have so many things I could work on. I have so many hats I could wear. There's no
Yeah.
burning out happening anytime soon because I am happily dissatisfied and I'm gonna keep working on that." So
Yeah. I-
I think it's an interesting thing just dealing with kind of the naysayers, quote unquote, that just don't really believe.
Yeah, there's somebody in particular in my life who I like can't talk to a lot about
Mm.
what I'm doing because one of their they always are focused on the negative thing. Like, well, what if this fails? What if this goes wrong? Right? Here's a question I've never been asked. What if this succeeds? What if this takes off
Right.
faster than you're thinking? What if it, nobody ever asks that. It's always what if this doesn't do well? And I don't, yeah, I try to not have a lot of that energy. I try to also be conscious of like how I feel when I hear something like that because it does very briefly sort of get me down for half a second because it's just negative energy, right? And
Mhm.
this is somebody who I care a lot about, but ultimately, like, they're not the right person for me to bring like challenges in the business or to have dialogue with about
Yep.
what I'm doing here. Like, I now keep it very high level if they ask about how things are going, right? Because I'm not looking for that energy in what I'm in sort of what I'm doing. So I'm totally with you. And I think it's totally fair. Like some of my like happily dissatisfied stuff is a little provocative just to get people thinking about that dynamic of enjoying the day to day, but wanting to get to a vision that you believe in. I think like it is also very fair to say that and sort of taking this big leap, you will feel, I feel very satisfied with my decision to do what I've done. I think that's an important piece.
Yeah.
I absolutely feel like I've made the right call. And in my previous role or life or whatever you want to call it, I kind of hit a point where I felt like I could fast forward my life to hopefully be hitting my 70s or whatever age I've, I have in me, and like getting into an age where I'm like, okay, looking like kind of like I know sort of what this is going to look like. It's fairly comfortable, but you only get one shot. To my knowledge, I know there's there's different beliefs about what that can look like, and hey, maybe I'm incorrect about that. Which cool, fun if you get more cracks than one at life. But I can only count for sure that I have one shot at this. So it's kind of like I want to spend my time not chasing, obviously I'm hoping that this is a successful and lucrative venture, but that's not necessarily like the only way I'm measuring success, right?
Mhm.
If I were putting vending machines in 20 offices, I'm probably looking more closely at is this making me money or what's going on here? When I'm doing the stuff like improv that is a huge passion, there are many ways to sort of measure if it's delivering what I wanted to, and only one of those is financial, right? There's like 19 other things that are like, how do people feel when they come into this business, and what am I getting from seeing the smiles on people's faces or listening to people laugh when they're performing in a show from the audience? Like it's just
Mhm.
those moments are priceless, and it's already cool to say that
Yeah.
we've in only a few months of being alive as a business, we've already created some of those moments for people.
Fun question to end on. I've been
Yeah.
curious. Wanted to ask you throughout this whole conversation, what's your favorite beer to drink? And what's the
Oh,
beer of
nice.
Michigan? Right, because IPAs are kind of the beer of California, or at least
Yep.
SoCal. So what's the beer of Michigan? And then what's your favorite beer?
Yeah, awesome question. I would say the beer of Michigan is probably Bell's Two Hearted might be the one that would most come to
Oh,
mind.
yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of in it's in a bottle with like fish on the
Is that
logo.
an ale? Is it an
It's
ale?
an IPA. Midwest style IPAs tend to be a little bit on the sweeter side, whereas like Southern California IPAs tend to be a little bit on the drier side. I actually prefer
Mhm.
California beer. Oh, IPAs generally.
I don't like IPAs that much.
Yeah.
I haven't assimilated into the IPA culture of California.
Well, and that's fine. People get pretty obnoxious about, the people that care the most can be not always communicating in a way that makes you want to like jump in and see what the fuss is about with regards to IPAs. I actually am a huge fan of, so on the IPA front, I like the California style, which is like Pilsner malts. It's very straw yellow in color. And the more modern way those beers are made is they've actually like way reduced the bitterness of the beer. So you're getting more of like a tropical expression. I particularly like New Zealand hops give like a
Yeah.
lot of white wine character and stone fruit. And so a lot of people that maybe haven't liked IPAs, I would love for people to try those and just see, because you may be like, oh, this isn't as bitter as I thought, or this isn't as, X as I thought. But, for the people that really haven't cared for them historically, there was a really unfortunate era in beer where there was like an arms race to have as many IBUs as possible, which are international bitterness units. And so everybody was like trying to get beer as bitter as humanly possible. And then hazy IPA was kind of a response to that to give it a more juicy, kind of
Yes.
feel.
Okay.
And then modern West Coast IPA is kind of a counter response to that, which is let me give you a lot of the flavor you're liking without kind of a heavier body that you get from like a hazy beer. I actually am really partial to black IPAs. They kind of have a little bit of toasted quality from like the addition of, darker malts. But what's really fun about black IPAs is if you close your eyes, a lot of them really still taste very like Pacific Northwest style pine tree sap sort of stuff. So the good ones, like if you close your eyes, you would just be like, "Oh, this is an IPA," and then you open your eyes, like that beer is, is black, and it's a style I like a lot. And then I do enjoy. Sorry, you got me going on beer. I can go forever
No,
on
I
beer.
know. I
Um,
it's
so and we're gonna brew. The short story is that Hearsay will be brewing across styles. So Jason is brewing, who was the brewery at Pointless, and he is passionate about a lot of different things. Actually, he's working very soon on like a chocolate peanut butter stout.
Ooh,
That's was
yes.
always a
Thumbs
fan
up there.
favorite. That's like a great
Yes.
dessert beer. That's the one you're going to want to take to our beer garden and have sitting around a fire. If you're like extra adventurous, you might want to make a s'more. Now you've got like a chocolate peanut butter beer and a marshmallow
Yes.
graham chocolate s'more. You're really just like, hedonistically embracing life in that moment. Yeah, beer and we plan to have wine and spirits as well. So when you talk about like wearing a lot of hats, I'm also working on getting approvals and getting partnerships in place for us to have a wine and a spirit program as well.
Nice, and for those pregnant mamas or breastfeeding mamas or those who choose not to drink, will there be mocktails on the menu too?
Yeah, so we're building a partnership with a lady named Kristen who has an awesome catering business that really flourished during the pandemic. She gave up drinking and started doing these pop ups, and it's been a huge hit for her. She has a business called Bar Bene that does events and stuff. And yeah, I think the key thing is like a lot of businesses, we call them from talking to her, she likes the phrase, using more of the phrase like non-alcoholic drinks or non-alcoholic cocktails over like mocktails, because I think like
Yeah,
they're not just like a bad imitation of a drink that has booze. It's more of like there's a lot you have to do because of with spirits, you actually want some watering down because they're starting off like pretty potent. But if you water down a non-alcoholic drink, you're left with like, because it's not starting with that alcohol, right? So you really want to
right.
minimize that dynamic. So we've had some great conversations. We're still kind of ironing out the final details, but we plan to have her have a role in helping us establish a really good NA program. We want to have one of the better menus in town. The younger generation actually does not drink as much. There's a lot of
Yep.
data
Mhm.
about that. People do dry January, and most businesses and most breweries are like, you know, really suffer during that month. And maybe for some people, there's also a dynamic of let me cut back on sort of my going out expenses. But for the people that want to go out and have a dry month, like if you're only giving them sparkling water or soda as an option, that's not necessarily what a lot of people want. So if you can give something a little fruity, a little, maybe it's dry, maybe it's more herbaceous, but use really interesting ingredients, that gets super neat in terms of what you can do. And so, yeah, we want to have a really solid NA program. We want people to feel included. We're trying
Yes,
to do all these things, and it's just like doing it all at the same time versus, there's going to probably have to be some things that like we don't open with, but we get to, and some things that
for
we're able to do
sure.
right away. But we want to have at least, I'm certain we'll have at least a couple really amazing options when we open, because it just wouldn't meet our standard for inclusion if we don't.
Well, and it sounds like even with dry January, and I know probably winter months in Michigan are a little tougher. You can't go outside in the beer garden, maybe. I don't know. You might have fire pits, but
Yeah.
you all will be okay in dry January because you've got improv classes and other things to fill the slots that can engage people. And so it's
Yeah.
not just all about the drinks.
Yeah, if you're too, that is an issue with bars and breweries, is you do get so focused sometimes on, you basically got one key product line, and it's like you sell
Mhm.
some here, and if you're a brewery, you sell some to go, right? And to go looks like a lot of things. It's all your retailer partnerships, you're getting beer into distribution, whatever that is. But it's like people are drinking your beer, they're either doing it there, they're doing it somewhere else, including at home. And yeah, when there's periods of people cutting back, and it's also a very crowded field. So the whole point
Yes.
too is, there's a lot of data out there. It's like you'd have to be kind of a fool to start a brewery right now in the current environment, because it's oversaturated, right? There's a zillion breweries. If you're in LA, you're surrounded by amazing breweries. You could probably, walk down the street and you might bump into three in some places.
Yep.
So you've got to have a reason to exist. And if that reason is like, we've got cold beer, that's not good enough. So yeah, exactly to your point, our philosophy, our theory is that the businesses work in tandem. And there's kind of this Venn diagram that we sort of talk about, which is, at least for our core businesses are beer and improv, right? So there's people that are really passionate about improv, there's people that are really passionate about beer. If you're in the Venn diagram in the middle, you're probably going to be our biggest fan. And I would say I would actually expand the beer category out to be like craft beverages, right? Because that could be an NA drink, it could be wine, it could be spirits. We don't want to serve stuff that stinks just to say we checked off a category. It's like you either like comedy, you like craft beverages, or you like both. And I guess I'd put food as maybe even another circle. But it's like, yeah, if you're in the sweet spot of those things, that's great. And if you only like one, well then hey, there's gonna be, it makes us less dependent on those other categories to keep the lights on. But we do have to do things in a way that doesn't confuse people. That is and like mostly so far it's been all improv content. So I think I look at our marketing sometimes, I'm like, you wouldn't really know for sure that we're going to be a brewery very soon unless you've been like following us super closely. So I think there's just like, we've got to show the love for all the different things we have available, but not just, finding kind of creative and inventive ways to say things, because we are a comedy theater. So if our marketing's pretty like, come buy this beer, come take this class, right? That gets pretty boring.
Tony, I can't wait. You're on my list to check in with, maybe do a, 2-year, 3-year check-in, because the podcast is gonna keep going for that long too, of course.
Yes.
Have you back on again and just see, like, how business is going and growing. Because right now we're catching you, like, really in the initial stages. And,
Yeah.
how can people follow you to follow this journey and see how the business changes and grows over time?
Yeah, so I like to say that all of our handles are confusing once and then it makes sense. So it's all hear.say, but dot is spelled out. So it's HEARDOTSAY.com and at hear.say for pretty much anywhere. I'm trying to learn TikTok so we can have a TikTok, but
Oh, good
we're
luck.
pretty,
Yeah.
yeah, we're actually, TikTok is the thing that makes me feel old and scares me, but that's okay. You got to follow your fears, right? To use improv language.
Mhm.
And some of my friends are starting to get really good with TikTok and finding stuff that works. So I'm like, that's cool. That's awesome. So Instagram and Facebook is kind of where we're most active. If people follow us there, that's great. People want to come stay for an overnight, you can do a trip to Ann Arbor, stay in the house and sort of hang out with us. But yeah, I'd love to see people out. And if you're in the Ann Arbor area and listening to the podcast, check out a class or show. We'd love to have you come down. But yeah, I hope we're a place that kind of catches people's attention, because it is a bit of a unique business model. And yeah, it just gets people curious enough to, I think a good taste is like, would you mildly inconvenience yourself to go out of your way and make a sidetrack to Ann Arbor and visit us? And if people start saying yes to that, that probably means we're doing the right stuff if they're coming from Detroit or from some of these surrounding areas and visiting us, we're probably doing the right thing.
I meant to ask, how did you come up with the name hear.say or hearsay brewing? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And so there were a few reasons. So first off, I've always liked the idea of like compound words that have a negative connotation but don't sound negative. So hearsay legally is inadmissible evidence because it's secondhand information. Um,
Oh, yeah.
but then I like stopped and was like, well, hearsay is literally what you do on stage because you're often representing things that you didn't actually do. It's stuff you've seen, characters that you might have interacted with, or somebody described their dad, and now that's influencing a character you do. So a lot of what we do on stage is hearsay. And then there's the most important concept is listen before you speak. So hear is listen, and then say would be speak. Very helpful in improv to actually listen. You know, if you initiate a scene and I didn't take in a single word, we're probably going to be two ships passing in the night going in different directions in the scene. And the period in the middle is all about taking a pause, right? So I do think there's a big connection between mindfulness and improv. And so taking a space to collect yourself that people sometimes, nerves can make people go really fast in improv. And there's some really great workshops out there about slowing down and mirror what the person said to like be engaged. And I think all that stuff is really good conceptually to kind of echo this idea of listen, take a pause, then speak or contribute. Because sometimes the funniest moves in improv scenes aren't speaking at all. It's contributing by with an eye, with a glance or a facial expression, right? But we did actually. So the only other note I would add about the name is we actually had to purchase the name because there was a hearsay company in Michigan, and so to register, we had to acquire the name rights from somebody, and it was a really cool lady who we've now had dinner with and gotten to know a little bit. And she collected punk rock footage from the '70s, and her husband was this guy from what is now the Czech Republic, and he rocked out with all these people like David Bowie and Iggy Pop, and so I guess they used to have a thing because he wasn't a native English speaker, something about hear what you say what you hear. And so her company for
Oh.
curating all this footage was called Hearsay. And now we're actually going to use that quotes in our one of our murals that we're doing inside the brewery is going to say hear what you say what you hear. And I think it's that idea of in that sense it was very literal, I think, but it also I think there was an intentionality around, hear what you say is interesting because that's then about it's kind of this pattern of listen, take a pause, speak, but then are you hearing what you're saying and are you aware of that? And then saying what you hear is call out the stuff that's happening around you, right? Like there's that principle in improv of like say the thing that's going on. If you feel like you're not connected to your scene partner, tell them say I don't feel connected to you, in character. But say what you hear, say what you feel, right? You're probably going to do a more interesting and honest scene if you just call out the thing versus try to like work around the thing or problem solve. I don't think we're on the same page right now. It's probably going to be a better moment in that scene than, oh, but you love going to, Costco with me. And just trying to like, create this scene working around. So anyway, those are some of the concepts at play with the name. And then we tend to, as much as we can, some platforms uppercase our stuff. We try to keep everything lowercase and just gives us like hopefully there's like a little bit of humility in that it's not just about us. It takes everybody to kind of make this whole thing work. So I hope there's some baked in humility in doing that. But yeah, that's what we're about, Dana.
Oh, I love the deeper meanings and connections that came of that name and building that you did not expect when you came up with it. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it kind of evolved. And yeah, hearing her story about the hear what you say what you hear is like, oh, that's so cool. I kind of want to put that on a shirt or a hat at some point. We started to
Absolutely.
build out our swag
The merch.
catalog. Yep,
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, you gotta have a good merch at a brewery because I mean, I've certainly bought plenty of brewery T-shirts and stuff, so the cooler the merch, the better. Yeah.
absolutely.
Tony, so fun. I didn't even pause for a break because we were just rolling
We were
and
rolling.
we were chatting about all things improv and beer and brewery and creating a business. I've said it already, but I'm just gonna tell you one more time. I'm so inspired by your journey. Thanks for coming on and sharing about your journey, the ups and the downs, all the things in between. I know it's not easy, and I know later it's easier to look back and have more of a linear path. Right now, it is not linear at all. It
Hmm.
is a crazy winding path. You seem on the outside like you're handling it so well. I have never been to Michigan yet, but when I come, I will definitely come check out the brewery, and I hope to take classes and just see it in action one day, and I will make that happen.
Well, I have a good idea of where you might be able to stay if you come visit us. So would love to
Exactly.
have you on site and check out what we have working. That would be a pleasure. And I'm yeah, similarly just so proud of just how you've taken the leap and embraced making improv such a huge part of your career and passion. And I think you're just such like a champion of talking about and promoting improv with like openness and positivity. So thank you so much, Dana.
Look how far we've come, right? We
Yes.
talked in 2021, and 3 years later, a little bit, maybe 2.5, 3 years later, we're making it happen. So your dreams and your passions can come true if you work on it, prototype it a little bit,
Yes.
and, Tony,
Good callback.
you're signed for that. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And if people want to reach out, if you're like in that boat of I want to take a leap on starting a business, I'm happy to connect with people and just hear and share ideas. So feel free to find me on LinkedIn or another way. You message our even our business account. I see all that. As I said earlier, I
Yeah.
am the customer service. So it's like don't ask to speak with our manager where I can tell you who you're gonna get. So
Oh, Tony, thanks so much again. I look forward to seeing this business grow and just blossom. This is awesome what you're doing, so just keep going with it.
thanks, Dana. All the best to you and your family and look forward to seeing you again in person soon.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to today's episode. Oh my gosh, I just am so inspired and blown away by Tony's journey to take the quote unquote big leap from corporate into following his passion for not only beer and improv, but creating a world of both where you can do both and create a community and craft a community, like he said, and craft fun and laughter from that community. It's really beautiful what he's doing in a smaller market, I guess, a college town area, Ann Arbor. It's cool that he's bringing this idea to it that certainly there are other improv theaters and improv opportunities in Ann Arbor, but also bringing kind of the beer experience, the community experience to for those that don't like to drink. There's also an experience of just coming and hanging out, a place to hang out and be with friends and family. That's so cool. I am certainly inspired by his journey, and I wish him just all the success and the best as he continues on this journey with this business. If you are in the Ann Arbor area, if you're close to Ann Arbor, if you are visiting Ann Arbor, please go check them out and support Hearsay Brewing. Apparently, the parking's a little difficult, but I think they have some information on their website on how to do that. If you go stop by, tell them that you heard about Tony and the brewery from this podcast, or, just follow along and support them as they go. This is a huge endeavor. It is a big leap, but certainly Tony having his MBA and having that entrepreneurial experience, he is definitely bringing to this journey now. As he was talking, I was thinking about when I lived in Columbia, South Carolina. I went to undergrad and grad school there, and I worked there for 5 or 6 years after I graduated from grad school. So I was in Columbia for about 10 to 12 years or so. Definitely another kind of college town, small market type of thing. And as I was working in the corporate world, I had this idea that I wanted to open a sand volleyball complex because in New Orleans, there was a huge, like 20 to 30 court sand volleyball complex called Coconut Beach. And it did get a little affected by Hurricane Katrina, and I think it is reopened now with different ownership. And there are a few other sand volleyball complexes that have branched out and opened since then. But I was in Colombia and I was like, there's no real beach volleyball. Like, there's these little courts that are at apartment complexes or around, but there's no real like big, 10 plus court beach volleyball complex. And it would be cool if I could make that and then have obviously a bar for food and drinks, and then also have a space for conferences or like team meetings and team building events. And this was all before I ever did improv. So I never had improv in the top of mind for team building events. But I remember having this idea and then going, well, I don't have $1,000,000 to start it, and it would be way more than $1,000,000 to start up that kind of business. But I was like, I don't have $1,000,000 to start it. I don't know where I would start it. It's a cool idea, but I don't even know where to go from it. Maybe if I win the lottery, I'll do it. And I say this story all to say is Tony is basically doing that idea, minus the sand volleyball, but instead of sand volleyball, it is with improv now. And I love that he has the space to hold classes and shows, and then also really cool idea to have the Airbnb on the side too. Genius. That's great. And I love that he didn't say, "Well, I don't know where to start, so I'm just not going to start." He said, "Hey, there's this cool thing." He talked with his partner, his co-founder. It slowly grew and built over time. And that's what has to happen, right? So if you get those cool ideas that you're like, "Wouldn't it be cool if I did this?" Say yes and to those ideas and just take it slow. Tony said you can prototype and do a little side hustle and then see how that goes and grows. And then you can maybe take a leap to doing it full time and then you can build a brick and mortar spot. So, yeah, I mean, certainly that idea came, I think, 6 to 8 years ago. Honestly, it's still in my head, either in the Columbia area or Charlotte area or, East Coast area. I think it would be so fun, and I think there's a market there. If anyone's hearing this and is like, "Yeah, I've got ideas," it's still an idea that I have that I think would be amazing. So I'm open to chat, and also, if you wanna take it and run with it, take it because Columbia and the East Coast area needs a facility like that for sure. So, all to say, I am super inspired by Tony's vision and then his work to actually make the vision happen. And I love his phrasing of happily dissatisfied. What I took that to mean is that he doesn't want to get content because if he ever finds himself content, then he'll want to move on to the next thing. And certainly growing a business, I don't think you reach that point of contentment for a while because you're always working on growing and paying back loans and making enough money to survive. But I hope that, if he ever does become happily satisfied, it sounds like there are so many avenues to explore and try out that he'll never reach that point of contentment. I love that idea that you can be happy with something and still want it to grow more. So, my question for you today is what is something that you are happily dissatisfied in right now? Or something that you could consider to be happily dissatisfied? Meaning, you're happy with the progress and the small wins and the victories, and you wanted to keep growing and going, and so you've got a few other things you wanna work on. So, you're not totally upset and just down about, like, I'm not where I wanna be." You recognize the situation you're in, and you can find the small wins. That's a cool way to think about it. I will say from my experience just in starting this business, I have so many ideas. There are so many things I want to do. I wish I could get a podcast episode out every week. I record enough of them that I could do that. I wish I could spend more time on podcasting, on social media, on working on my website, on working on the Podmom stuff. There are so many things I want to work on that I am dissatisfied with. And a lot of times that brings negativity into my work of I'm not doing enough. It usually shows up as I'm not doing enough, I'm not being enough, I'm not giving enough time. So there's that enoughness that comes in. And so if I can reframe and rephrase that, I recognize that there are places of improvement in my business. And I can take a step back and say, I am still happy that we are growing and I'm doing the best I can, especially right now with little baby girl. I am doing the best I can. I am doing enough with this business. I have started the foundation that will keep this business going even during maternity leave. The business will keep going and I can pick it up after I'm back from maternity leave. So, I don't know, I think it's a cool way to not get down and actually have a positive spin on all the challenges that come with having a business and many other things in life, of course, too. You can definitely tell that Tony loves talking about this stuff and is very passionate about people following their dreams and passions and pursuits. Definitely reach out to him as a resource if you are considering taking a leap of any kind or business venture of any kind and you kind of want that support, or just kind of someone to talk to who's been there, done that before, please reach out to him. He's an excellent resource and just so much fun to talk to. I mean, we could just talk forever on improv and beer too. If you like beer, go talk to Tony too, because obviously he likes talking about that. I will say I can't drink right now, of course, and I've also done an episode on how I'm not drinking as much. Even pre-pregnancy, I wasn't drinking as much, and I do love the taste of beer. Porters and stouts are my kind of beers, which aren't great for the summer months because those are heavy beers, but I love the taste of darker style beers and the flavors that they give off. So Hope and Hearsay, I'm sure will have some porters and stouts on their menu too. Would love to hear from you about this episode, anything that came up, anything that you're working on, anything that you're happily dissatisfied with. You can reach out to me on Instagram at Improvly Speaking. On LinkedIn, I'm at Dana Gowan. And you can find out all about my services, offerings, workshops, all the avenues that I'm working on in the business at improvryspeaking.com. That's improv, speaking.com. Also, I did want to mention, quick shout out, that I don't know my Michigan geography very well, but Tony mentioned that Ann Arbor is about 40 minutes away from Detroit. And so after we got off and stopped recording, I was like, oh, I had a guest on recently named Paula Dirks who does senior improv, and she has a website and webinars about running senior improv games and exercises. And so I was like, oh, let me connect you with Paula just to see if you need any senior resources as you're pursuing maybe classes for the senior population or retired population too. I know retired population and senior population are the same and also different. Paula focused a lot on senior facilities, like assisted living facilities, but still, it was a fun connection. I was like, oh, I know someone who does senior improv. Let me connect you. So, I've got some really cool people in Detroit doing some very cool improv things there. So check them out. So happy you're here. And I hope that you are feeling inspired to take the leap in pursuing your creative passions and outlets in any way, shape, or form. Thanks so much for listening today and supporting Improvly Speaking. I hope you're feeling inspired and encouraged to say yes and flex your creative thinking. I'll talk to you next time.